And the next the next series of issues I'd like to address today is just basic idea of working with files. But perhaps before turning the page to files, I'd like to demonstrate something else which may be extremely useful in your coding. So let me give you an example that sometimes what's the issue is that when you're working, I'd like to use a presentation somewhere here just to clear this and start over. So this is something I'd like to talk about. Sometimes you need to be able to um, uh, convert from text, from plain text, to a numeric value. And sometimes you need to be able to convert from a numeric value back to plain text, right? Plain text. So to give you an example, for instance, I may be working with a database. Okay, so here I'm working with the database, and I need to construct a query language statement, which, for instance, looks like this. Right, so this is a database SQL standard query language, possibly statement that I need to be able to construct inside my C++ program. And it needs to become a string. So I need to say something like this: select name and phone from table users, table users, where user ID equals, and how about we now need to provide a specific value over here, right? So now we need to be able to provide a specific value. So how do you, and at the same time, we have this value as integer. So somewhere in our code, we already have this value, which looks like this: integer user user ID, right? So we have this integer user ID that equals 456. Okay, so somewhere we already populated this user ID, and so our task is to be able to take this user ID right here, which is an integer, right? Just take this user ID over here, which is an integer, and embed it into a string over here, which needs to be plain text, right? So this is an integer, and this is plain text. In text. So what do you do, right? How do you make these types of transitions? So you go, we need to go from the integer over here. We need to go and convert that integer to a plain text. So here's the demonstration. Let's just talk about this, the solution to this problem. And for this, I'll just remove all of this. And what would be desirable, I think, the desirable thing would be to use a stream of some kind, output stream, to which we can write our integer, like user ID. Right? And so here we can say integer user ID equals 456. And then take this integer user ID and write it into a string, and as a result of it, would then be able to recover text version of user ID by simply going to this output stream in memory and saying, give me your string. And then we can construct our statement. So we can say SQL statement equals, like we did over there, select name phone from table users, where user ID equals, and here we can simply concatenate it with the text version of user ID. So my point is that the integer user ID, which you may already have in your code, cannot be simply concatenated with a string, right? Like take one string and concatenate it with another. Before you can concatenate it like this and construct a longer string, what we need to be able to do is construct another plain text version of this value. And of course, the question is, what is this? And this is what we can use is standard library output string OSTR, we can name it. In order to be able to use this device, this is a qualified to be string stream, which basically uses buffer of memory to convert from internal numeric formats to plain text format. So this thing over here, the method or member function named str extracts plain text from the stream. Right. So this is the stream. This is the stream already populated with some information, and now it's possible to use the stream to write into it numeric values and then simply extract the plain text from that stream, so in form of user ID. To be able to use this, we need to include a stream header. So upon completion of this little exercise, I can say I can write SQL statement is, hit a new line, and now print my SQL statement right here, and then hit another new line possibly, right, and just print this information on the screen. How about we use a couple of new lines over here. Let's give it a try. Let's build this and see how this looks like. So this is the screen of my output, and you can see that as a result of like step by step, first we constructed the string stream. In fact, it's called output stream. This is what the O stands for. So this is just encapsulates buffer of memory. But the good news about that buffer of memory is that we can use it to write into it numeric values. Okay, and so as a result of me writing this numeric value into the stream, what happens is that we get we can then extract plain text version of this number out of the stream right here. And you can see that I was successful to plug it in right here into plain text. So essentially, integer got converted to a plain text. If I wanted to convert this number to a hexadecimal form, I could also use something like this, right? So here, instead of just using decimal format, I can also convert this into a hexadecimal format if I wanted to, right? So if this is something I wanted. So then again, I will just rebuild this and run it, and you can see that this time the my user ID 456 decimal got converted to 1C8, which is a hexadecimal equivalent of decimal 456. So this is really very powerful and very simple and very effective in terms of doing conversion from plain text. From internal numeric formats to plain text. Whenever we need to do something like that. The opposite example would be, right, so this is the opposite example would be that I just do a little bit of more demo with this type of code, is that supposedly that I somehow retrieved if I already retrieved my user ID as a string. I have a string version of user ID. But now my challenge is to convert this string version of user ID into an integer. So I have this, let me just kind of like copy this out to a function. We'll say ostring, just say void ostring demo. Okay, just use a little function for this, and we'll move all of this out of here so that we can do another demonstration. So this time, let's say I say text user ID, just follow the same convention. Text user ID equals, and I'll use again hexadecimal. I'm sorry, I mean really just like this. Hexadecimal 4C8 input like this. So somehow I was able to obtain user ID as a hexadecimal number, and I was able to store it in a string. My intention is to now populate an integer user ID. with this type of value, with the internal integer value of this hexadecimal input. So what I would do then, of course, would be to say construct I string, a string. This is input for text values, and the idea is that I call it ISTR over here, and typically you can instantly populate it with the text that you want. So it's from its construction time. You can say basically the idea here is to construct memory buffer and populate it with some text, right? And then the next line would be that we use this input stream to simply convert this input first using hexadecimal format, because we are expecting hexadecimal input, and convert it to our user ID. Right, and the proof of concept, then we can say standard output. We can print that user ID is, and we will print what it is. This is the result of our input right here. And then print new lines, a couple of new lines, and I prefer to, if I do some experimentation, I prefer like square bracket the values that I try to focus on, so that it gives me some kind of highlight. So let's take a look what's happening here. Oh, I forgot the semicolon. Okay. On this version of the program, it tells me that the user ID is 1124. Is this correct? Let's out. So if I use like a calculator, use calculator view, and I switch it to decimal input, and enter this value that I was getting from my program, 1224, right? And you can see that hexadecimal value is indeed correctly 4C8. So anyway, so this actually worked well. In fact, if I wanted to verify it by using cout, user ID is decimal this, and I can continue my output. And say that it's the hexadecimal equivalent is now switch to hexadecimal format, and display user ID one more time, like this. Okay, so once display the decimal, and then the second time display the hexadecimal version of it, and try this statement. So let's build this. And so here, right? So now I am, instead of using the calculator, I validated by my own C++ code, displaying once as a hexadecimal and second time as a I mean, first time as decimal and the second time as hexadecimal value. So you can see that it's very easy to go from plain text to integer, and even using other than decimal notations, you can still use very typical processing by using string operators like hexadecimal and decimal. And if I need to switch back to decimal format, I can use this, right? So if I wanted to replace this input with the hexadecimal equivalent, which is, I mean, the decimal equivalent, which was, I already forgot the value that it was trying to display to me. Let me just run it. With the hex version one more time. Right. So the value was 1224. Actually, this is the value, right? So this time I'm trying to work with the decimal value. If I want to parse and input this decimal value, so I replace it with the decimal value, and this time, although it's a default, I will just use the corresponding manipulator so that I can switch from one manipulator to another if I want to. And if I use this input right now using the decimal format, you see that it still works exactly the same way. So that's the same value, and that's the same value also. Right, so just keep in mind that these streams in memory, which are really helper objects, which facilitate conversion from integer to text or from text to integer, meaning plain text, is very possible using these helper classes in the library. You need to include stream, which stands for string streams, and for inputs you typically to be able to generate some input into your internal formats, you use input string stream, and for outputs you use the output string stream, and use them as stream devices, and it's extremely effective. And normally all data type conversions from text to internal values and vice versa can be handled by these streams very, very effectively. So you don't have to reinvent your own wheel to find a way to make these conversions manual. Don't write your own code to struggle with these conversions. Like basically, how do you convert integer to a text and vice versa? You can just use these devices, input string stream and output string stream. They're very, very effective, and I hope you remember that those types of facilities exist in the library, and that's just the way to go. Effective, efficient, and can handle various formats.